back. I hope you had an enjoyable lunch. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. Jay Efran. Jay is a professor emeritus in psychology from Temple University in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has over 50 years experience in private practice and many years as a professor, over 100 articles and book chapters, and 2 books I'll mention. First are Language, Structure, and Change, Frameworks for Meaning in Psychotherapy, and a second book entitled The Tao of Sobriety, Helping You Recover from Alcohol and Drug Addiction. Jay's been a longtime member of the Constructivist Psychology Network, a founding member, and also has received our Lifetime Achievement Award. He's also received a Lifetime Achievement Award, or Distinguished Contributor to Science and Profession Award, from the Psychological Association in Pennsylvania. So without further ado, I've introduced you to Jay, and I look forward to hearing his address. Thank you. I just forgot one thing. For CE credit, you can go to Nicole in the red sweater at the back, and she will sign you in and sign you out. Thanks.
So after an introduction like that, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. In this session, I plan to tell you everything I know about psychotherapy and life. About 45 minutes should do it. After all, think of how much stuff they cram into those TED Talks, and they're only like 18 minutes. I need a little more time because I'm not as good as those guys. I want to begin by showing you a picture of the Waitomo Caves in New Zealand. And there's actually 2 pictures of this. That's one, and that's the second. Now, if you look up at the ceilings of those caves, you might think you're gazing at the night sky. However, it turns out that those thousands of dots of light that you see are actually the luminous tails of blind worms that attach themselves to the ceilings of the cave. Their tails, the luminous tails, attract small insects which they then trap and eat. Eventually, those larval creatures turn into tiny winged insects, fungus gnats, if you must know. They live for about 48 hours as winged creatures, never seeing the light of day. And in that brief time, they mate, lay eggs, and are then consumed by other worms of the same cannibalistic species. This cycle has been going on for millions of years, long before humans discovered the caves, and it will presumably continue for millions of additional years, probably long after we're gone. So, what's the point of all this frantic biological activity? Evidently, none. As philosopher Richard Taylor puts it, the point of any living thing's The point of any living thing's life is nothing but life itself. Biologist Humberto Maturana calls the process autopoietic, literally meaning self-creating or self-producing. Poiesis meaning to produce or create, auto meaning self. We could have also used as our example the torturous journey of the salmon upstream, where it goes to lay eggs and then dies, or the 17 years certain cicadas spend underground in preparation for their 4-week bash above ground. The potentially disturbing news is that our own lives follow much the same pattern as these worms, salmon, and cicada. In fact, any living species we might name. We too rush here and there going about our daily chores, mainly so that our children and our children's children can follow in roughly the same footsteps. We do build architectural marvels, but these too crumble over time, and those that don't crumble eventually become tourist attractions. As Maturana puts it, life, therefore, is a purposeless drift, a meaningless drift. Picture a boat without oars, without a motor, without sails. Where it travels depends on the interplay between the structure of the boat and the patterns of the wind and the waves. The boat continues this purposeless journey until it meets up with what Maturana calls a disintegrative interaction. And Maturana says we're all entitled to one. That's Bob's department when that happens. The boat at that point loses its structural integrity as a boat, and we now think of it as driftwood. Until that final disintegrative interaction, everything had been going along pretty well. It's like the person who was falling off a 40-story building, and as he was descending, he saw some people looking out of the third floor window, and he waved to them and said, "So far, so good." So it's a bit like that. Now, the major difference between us and the drifting boat is that we have language. Therefore, unlike the boat, we tell elaborate stories about where we're going, where we have been, and what it all means. Using language, we attach reasons to everything that happens, making it all seem very reasonable. Reasons, reasonable. Purpose of reasons is to make life seem reasonable. In fact, human beings virtually never get caught with their reasons down. They can explain and justify practically anything. You know, you go to a restaurant and you're determined to have the salmon, and the waiter comes by and you order the steak. And your friends say, "I thought you were going to have the salmon." Well, you will explain, you will have now reasons why you've changed your mind and ordered the steak. The steak just looked good to me. Unfortunately, many of our most impressive justifications are crafted post hoc, and most of them are false. Putting aside our fancy stories, philosopher Sartre appears to have been right in his pronouncement that, quote, "It is meaningless that we are born, it is meaningless that we die." Or as they say in the East, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter. By the way, is there anybody that's, I thought I was going to be able to, let me just take my watch off so I can keep, you have a timekeeper? I'm going to take my watch off anyway, but okay, good. Now please note that that aphorism, "It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter," has two parts. Oh, thank you. Now we have multiple. That aphorism has two parts. "It doesn't matter" is part one, and part two is "it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter." Both parts are essential. When you tell some people that it doesn't matter, they sometimes kind of cross their hands defiantly and say, "Well, if it doesn't matter, why should I be working so hard?" Well, they didn't get the second part of the aphorism, which is, "It doesn't matter that it doesn't matter." And besides, it's hard work to do nothing. You can't just sit there. I mean, if you could really sit there and just do nothing, we'll alert the press, because that's very difficult for human beings, as those of you who meditate know how difficult doing nothing can be. And some people can't even manage the idleness of a day at the beach. Starts to drive them to distraction. And of course, solitary confinement is considered one of the most severe punishments available. So no matter what I say about the meaninglessness of existence, now did I come to the right group to talk about this? No matter what I say about it, you will continue pursuing your meaningless goals until or unless you trade them in for some other equally meaningless goals. Years ago, I saw a client who was depressed, and I think we'd say he was suffering from a kind of midlife crisis. He had concluded that his current job as a financial advisor was totally meaningless. So I pointed out to him that he had accidentally stumbled on half the truth. Yes, indeed, his job was totally meaningless. However, he had failed to notice that so was everybody else's job. He and I proceeded, we had a kind of Socratic dialogue in which I demonstrated that even those occupations he considered the most significant were fundamentally meaningless in terms of the big picture. In fact, it's possible to argue persuasively that either every job is extremely important or that none are. What's difficult is picking and choosing some over others and saying that this is important and this is not important. That's like saying the birds are important but the trees aren't, or the flowers are but the bees aren't. You can't pick and choose that way. Now, after all, surgery is just high-class plumbing. Tubes. Moreover, the surgeon is basically useless when it's your basement that's flooding. Now, of course, this client believed, as many of us do, that meaning resides in the job. I would rather tie meaning to what a person brings to the job and how he or she does the job. In other words, you bring satisfaction to the job. You don't get satisfaction from the job. You bring it to the job. You are the source of satisfaction, not the job. The Japanese tea ceremony is not about the tea. It's about the beauty and elegance the performer brings to the ceremony. And if we were out of tea and were so inclined, we could invent a taking out the trash ceremony that would be just about as effective. So this client was seriously considering changing occupations, and I told him he was certainly free to do that. But I predicted that if he did, he'd be right back a few years from then saying that his new vocation, whatever it turned out to be, had also failed to satisfy him or to make him happy. In fact, trying to find happiness out in the world is always a fool's errand. Maybe some of you don't know where the word happiness comes from. It comes from the Norse word root hap, H-A-P, as in our words happen, and happenstance. And it means luck or fate, as in happenstance. So when you say you're searching for happiness, you're really saying you're going out there looking for luck. That doesn't sound like a good idea. On the other hand, what we often mean by happiness, perhaps better called satisfaction, typically occurs when we aren't looking for it, as a byproduct of becoming fully immersed in some actual and challenging pursuit. So in any event, this client stayed in his original occupation. Coincidentally, because I knew I was coming here, I managed to run into him about 2 weeks ago. It's been about 25 years since we did our work together, and he's still in his current profession and still doing well. I guess one measure of the success of our work is the large number of clients he's sent me over the years. Now, as it turns out, the notion that life has no intrinsic or objective meaning, which some find disturbing, contains some good news, actually some very good news. We could say it is the fundamental meaninglessness of it all that provides exactly the right kind of canvas onto which, using language, we can create, generate, establish, or declare our very own set of meanings. By language, by the way, I mean both words and symbols. If life came with predetermined meanings, creating our own would be a trickier proposition. However, the meanings we concoct are double-edged swords. We often create them and then find ourselves tripping over the ones that we have just created. They become reified when we aren't looking. In fact, it's the conglomeration of fixed beliefs and mischievous meanings that clients bring to therapy that make the clinician's job both challenging and necessary. A few years ago, the Philadelphia Inquirer interviewed Iko Ishioko. She's the Japanese designer who did the costumes for the opening ceremonies of the Beijing Olympics, and she also did the costumes for the movie The Cell, and she also has designed some of the Cirque du Soleil costumes, such as these. By the way, I don't usually use PowerPoint. I had to use PowerPoint to be able to show you these slides, because my feeling is power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. So that's an example of one of her costumes, and here's another. So when she was interviewed, she said all she had in her apartment was a chair, a glass table, and big windows. She said she was afraid to buy a sofa. She said, this is a direct quote, "Empty space is very important to me. When I start to work with a new project, I must throw away all of my achievements in the past and have a blank canvas and think about it from zero." In other words, she was speaking about the advantages of starting with nothing. You know, most artists have to have a canvas with nothing on it if they're going to work. You start with nothing. Nothing is a valuable commodity. Therapists, too, must find reliable ways to declutter the therapeutic space, much the way surgeons begin their work by establishing a sterile operating field. The rules and regulations with which clients burden themselves, what I like to call their importances, basically derive from their membership in clubs, their church, family, peer group, workplace, race, culture, and so on. Each of these clubs create a linguistic domain, including a jargon and a set of house rules. Such domains can be relatively circumscribed and non-problematic, such as the domain of chess or checkers. Those are linguistic domains. I know you move pieces, but you can't move pieces without language. Now, they can be broader and more potentially problematic domains such as religion, politics, business, and so on. I need to point out that all domains are closed, and that's true by definition. So what do I mean by that? By that I mean that you cannot get out of a domain using the terms of that domain. A move in chess is always about chess. The only way to get out of chess is by collapsing the board. Similarly, you can't get out of religion using the terms of religion. Religious questions generate religious answers. No exceptions. That's why I was amused a while back. I heard that a local Bible study group was having a debate about the existence of God. Want to guess how that one turned out? It's a Bible study group. They're asking religious questions and they're going to get religious answers. Now, not only do clients come in with a host of beliefs, images from the past, fixed attitudes, and false causal assumptions, therapists often add their own explanatory fictions to the mix. Notions such as ego strength, frustration tolerance, insecure attachment, anger management, and so on. Did I offend most? Everybody in the room? Even such common clinical terms that we take for granted, such as anxiety and depression, are usually more of a hindrance than a help. Here's my quick take on why it does not make sense for therapists to treat anxiety. Let's suppose that a bear came through that door and was chasing you, and you needed to try to escape through one of those doors, and as you got there, you found out it was locked. You would then experience what Roy Schaefer used to call blocked action, which you will label as fear or anxiety. While you're running, you do not experience that. But when you find the doors locked and you can't go any further, your action is blocked, and now you experience it as fear or anxiety. In a playground fight, for instance, there was a study done, and they interviewed kids, and this kid was talking about hitting another kid's head against the pavement. They were in a fight, and they asked if he was angry, and he said no, he wasn't aware of being angry. He was just hitting. The anger was previous, but now that anger is blocked aggression. So now that the aggression is not blocked, it's not perceived as anger anymore. This is a fact that most of us fail to notice, but is actually quite important in clinical work. Anyway, if you have your cell phone with you, you might want to text your therapist and tell them you're in urgent need of anxiety relief. However, you should really be asking about ways to get rid of or deal with the bear. If you can handle the bear, your anxiety problem will take care of itself. If you don't handle the bear, anxiety will be the least of your worries. The confusion is that our mental health bears are harder to see than real live bears, so it begins to seem reasonable to both clients and therapists to talk about decreasing or eliminating anxiety. However, I say the smart money is on identifying the bear and figuring out how to deal with it. Even therapists who ought to know better sometimes are not smart enough to do that. So they get embroiled in all kinds of explanatory fictions that really distract attention from what the person is doing, why it tends to mess things up, and what they might do instead. Okay, so meanwhile, while the therapeutic canvas is cluttered, therapists are tempted to keep painting over and fussing with the existing content. Lots of fixing, but very little creating. That's why the title of this talk was Fixing versus Creating. Having gotten stuck in what the client presents, they have trouble moving to a higher level of abstraction. I like this quote from family therapist Doug Flemons. He puts it this way, he says, about therapists, they answer the wrong question right away and never get to the right question, which they then have to learn how to answer in the right way rather than the wrong way. And Einstein, too, said you can rarely solve a problem on the level at which it was created. Makes good sense. To solve it, you must move to a higher level. In therapy, staying on the level of content is very inefficient. It involves minor fixes to pre-existing games. Pre-existing, you still remain in the linguistic domain the client has put on the table. Exploring the process that generated the content is somewhat better. So you've got content, and then above that, you have process, the relationship that, or the activity that created the content. But I would rather go to the next level up and deal with context rather than content or process. I want to create and shift to a larger context, putting the chessboard away and playing Monopoly or Scrabble instead, or perhaps inventing a new game that hasn't been seen as yet. The magic is that when the context shifts, so does everything beneath it automatically. So for instance, if we declared that this session was over, we would not also have to explain to everybody that they might get out of their seats, chat with one another, consult their programs to see what's coming up next. All that's automatic. All of it is handled as soon as we move from the context in session to the context break time. In context-centered therapy, I like to start with the big picture. The empty slate in which nothing truly matters. And, although I haven't mentioned it till now, life is never considered personal, even when it looks as if it is. It's those two broad operating assumptions that keep me sane, protect me from burnout, and help provide the leverage I need to do the work I want to do. So the two broad assumptions are, is it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter. None of it truly matters. I know it matters to you, but who are you? And it's not personal. Now, ordinarily, people can shift easily from one domain to another as they move through the day or the week. Sometimes, however, they get stuck in a particular limiting domain or caught in a clash of domains, what Maturana calls an emotional contradiction. For instance, a devout Catholic has gotten embroiled in an extramarital affair. Or a college freshman is doing more pot than homework. You can think of an emotional contradiction as what may have happened to you when you were a college student and living in a dorm, let's say, and your friends barged in not realizing that your parents were visiting. Now you have to be two people at the same time. The person you are with your friends and the kid your parents expect you to be. So it becomes very awkward. There's an emotional contradiction. You have the problem of being two people at once. If this is just goes on once in a while, no great problem. By the way, I was at a restaurant once in Philadelphia, and the service, I was having troubles with the service, and I was in the process of yelling and screaming at the waitress. And then a table or two down, I was recognized by some students who came over to say hello. You know how difficult it is to seem professorial while you're screaming? You're having a tantrum. Oh, hello. So, temporary clashes of that sort we can handle. Chronic ones is what sends you to therapy. Because these dilemmas relate so directly to club membership, it's critical that the therapist not be a member of the exact same clubs as the client. Otherwise, they're apt to find themselves trapped in the exact same conceptual ditches. When I supervise clinicians, I'm often interested in the fact that if a student is presenting a case of a depressed person, soon you notice that that student presenting is depressed. And as the discussion goes on, the entire mood of the team sinks. And soon nobody can see any way out of the client's dilemmas. Those dilemmas seem overwhelming. We've all donned the very same set of blinders and have lost touch with the larger context. Here's how Alan Watts puts it. It's a great disadvantage to any therapist to have an axe to grind, because this gives him a personal interest in winning. But we saw in reference to the Zen master that he can play the game effectively just because winning or losing makes no difference to him. In other words, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter. One person who noticed the problem of getting trapped in the client's stuff was Harvey Jackins, the creator of reevaluation counseling. He was having a session and it got bogged down and he didn't know what to do next. So he suggested to the client they go down to the basement to the soda machine and have a Coke. And then when they got back up, things started clicking again and the conversation became animated and productive. Just the trip to the soda machine seemed to provide enough perspective to break the logjam. So because of these kinds of observations, Jackins suggested clinicians must always keep one foot in the problem so they can know what's being discussed, and the other foot outside the problem so they don't lose perspective. Years ago, I saw a couple. The husband was having an affair. He promised several times to stop seeing his paramour, but didn't seem able to keep those promises. His wife was still hoping to save the marriage, but she was torn apart by the back and forth indecisiveness of the situation. When I met separately with the husband, he said that although he loved his wife, he found the thought of giving up his lover forever unbearable. I was encouraged by the fact that they did seem to love each other, they sought help together, and they both had a lot of concern for the welfare of their 5-year-old daughter. They both rejected the advice of 2 other therapists. I have to admit, I sometimes like seeing clients who've seen other therapists where there's been failure. Because then if I fail, and if I succeed, anyway. One of them was an imago therapist who insisted that their childhood held the key to the problem, but he couldn't offer any practical advice about what they should do in the current situation. The second therapist took a highly moralistic stance toward the husband's transgressions, and both spouses found this patronizing approach objectionable. So in this case, I proposed an unorthodox experiment. I suggested the couple separate for 3 months, and that during this time the wife grant her husband full permission to see his girlfriend. At first, this idea struck them both as slightly preposterous. However, they were open-minded enough to give it a try, perhaps because they couldn't think of anything better to do, and they were both exasperated by the status quo. The husband agreed that at the end of the 3 months, he would decide whether to continue the marriage or file for divorce. By the way, I only tell these stories where they didn't file for divorce. Now, of course, now that the affair was no longer forbidden fruit, its appeal waned, as I had suspected it might. Living with someone in an efficiency apartment is far different from meeting them for secret dates in romantic, candlelit settings. The husband soon discovered his girlfriend had habits he disliked, such as leaving her clothes on the floor and the dishes in the sink. He also realized he's misjudged the level of compatibility between them. By the end of the 3-month trial period, he'd made up his mind if his wife would still have him, he would return home. It was a simple shift in context that seemed to do the trick. As usual, the new context generates a different process, which in turn generates different sets of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Now, as Maturana suggests, successful therapy has one requirement. It must always generate what he calls orthogonal interaction. I'm not going to bother you with the technical definition of that term. Suffice to say, a new and different game has to be played. A different set of importances has to be tried on for size. A new kind of interaction has to be generated. A new context has to be created. It has to be a game the client is capable of playing, but one that is not often called for him or her to play in his or her usual club affiliations. Alfred Adler, remember Alfred Adler? Had a colorful way of putting it. He said the therapist must spit in the client's soup. Of course, the client is free to go right on eating, but nothing is going to taste quite the same. You may recall a while ago I said life is not personal. The husband in this case I described was not trying to hurt his wife, not trying to ruin their lives. Relationship satisfaction is mainly a matter of fit, how we fit together. We do not usually get up in the morning and try to figure out how to make ourselves and those around us miserable. We're doing the best we can. Finding a good fit with others is a tricky matter, but it's even trickier if you take the thing personally. The truth is that the way a person treats you is the way they would treat anyone who represented to them whatever you happen to represent to them. I'm going to say that again. The truth is that the way a person treats you is the way they would treat anyone who represented to them whatever you happen to represent to them. You just happen to be an extra from central casting. It isn't personal. The person is just doing himself or herself, and you happen to be standing there. They're not trying to destroy your life. Paradoxically, even when it is personal, it isn't personal. I may need to let you sleep on that one. You know, if I have love for you, I just do. No particular reason. I didn't plan it that way and I can't help it. It isn't necessarily logical or convenient. And it isn't personal. It just happened. You happen to trigger me in a way that love came out. I'm sorry it happened with you, not the person it was supposed to happen with, but that's just the way it is. I want to give you another clinical example. I was asked by a hospital to see a young woman on an emergency basis. She had been being seen by a therapist on their psychiatric staff. Now, unfortunately, at that particular moment, her therapist was in a coma, having tried to commit suicide. And this patient's major complaint was that she wanted to kill herself, and many of the sessions she'd had with this therapist was the therapist attempting to talk her out of killing herself. And now the therapist had tried to kill herself. So when she came for her appointment, she was told the therapist was unavailable. The client found out the therapist had made a suicide attempt and was taking the position of her therapist, the one who was trying to keep her alive, could kill herself. Why shouldn't she do the same? And the hospital staff was both dealing with the grief of having a staff member make a suicidal attempt, and so they asked if I would. They didn't want to deal with this client, so they sent her down to me. So when we met, that's exactly what she told me. Like, if she can do it, why can't I do it? So I said, in fact, every one of us has a perfect right to kill him or herself, even her therapist. If we don't have that right, what rights do we have? Are we allowed to smoke, which some people consider a slow way of killing yourself? Are we allowed to overeat or go on a bungee jump? I pointed out that if she thought I was here to talk her out of killing herself, she had another think coming. Perhaps her regular therapist had that goal, but it didn't accord with my philosophy. And then I added a question. I said, have you ever been to Brazil? She looked at me just about the way you just looked at me. No, she said. I explained that, look, if I was going to kill myself, there are a bunch of things I might want to do first. I might want to try parachute jumping or hang gliding. I might want to travel to South America and see some of the sights. After all, you know, like, what's the rush? Is there a Tuesday special that I haven't heard about? Is this Thursday any different than last Thursday or next Thursday? And I said, if you're going to do it, please make sure it's what you want, because do-overs are not great in that domain. So we then discussed the fact that although she knew how Act 1 had gone, she didn't have much certainty about Act 2. Of course, Act 2 might turn out as dismally as Act 1 had, in her view. On the other hand, it might turn out to be something completely different, especially if she was able to apply some of what she had learned in Act 1. Therefore, I suggested if she wanted to stick around for a couple of months, I'd be happy to chat about possible scripts for Act 2. She agreed. I should add that in our work over those next several months, she never again brought up the topic of suicide. And moreover, when I last looked, she was still among the living. Just on a down note, that's not so for her therapist who survived that suicide attempt, but made another about 2 years later and succeeded in the therapist in killing herself. So evidently following Adler's advice, I had successfully spit in that particular client's soup. So to review, life consists fundamentally of a meaningless drift. That's where we start. Using language, both words and symbols, we add meaning to the drift. Moreover, all those meanings are our meanings, and they're more malleable than most of us realize. Because of our club affiliations, we tend to treat local ordinances as if they were universal truths. Way back when I was at Ohio State, George Kelly made this point dramatically. In a class he was teaching that I was in, he suddenly riveted his gaze on my classmate, Lane Kahn, and he said, "The trouble with Lane Kahn is that he thinks he has to go right on being Lane Kahn." There was a long pause in there, so we all were like holding our breath. I didn't ask for sound effects, did I? We had to first get over, after we got over the shock that what seemed like a public rebuke of a fellow student by Kelly, we realized he was just arguing passionately against our getting stuck in any particular linguistic domain, even the one we call ourselves. To use a somewhat different analogy, he wanted us to recognize that we are the storyteller, not the story. We're the screen and not the film that's being projected on the screen. If we don't like the current feature, we have the ability to change it out for something more interesting or agreeable. Perhaps the therapist's most useful service is helping the client be clear about that. Kelly once said, "Whatever exists can be reconstrued," and he added that it's not to say that it makes no difference how it's construed. Quite the contrary, it often makes a world of difference. Some reconstructions may open fresh channels for a rich and productive life. Others may offer one no alternative save suicide. Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Not answers, but just questions. By the way, if there are no questions, that either means nobody understood anything, or people understood everything and there's nothing to question.
Have you ever had a client where you tried to take that kind of you're allowed to take your own life approach, who actually went and did it?
No.
Okay, it's very effective. Interesting.
If we had time, I could tell you about the one or two cases where I found myself on the periphery of a suicide situation, But none of my clients actually killed themselves. So far, so good. Oh, incidentally, there's a new book on suicide prevention contracting, and the title of the review of it said something like, no, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it straight. Essentially, the message is suicide contracts not only are ineffective, they can actually do damage, and we should probably think twice before using them. And I never use a suicide contract. First of all, how would I enforce it? And I just think it undercuts the relationship I have with the client and the positioning I want to have with the client, which is they can say and do anything.
It strikes me that it takes a certain kind of confidence in the therapist or a state of being to approach that directly and that honestly and that bluntly, a person who is suicidal. And so I wonder if you could say something about yourself and the state of being you're in when you speak in that way, because I think somebody could do what you did and be in such a shaky state that it might very well precipitate the client in a certain direction.
Thanks for that question. I want to say two things about it. First, I'm coming from a position of love. I'm there to support the person. This is not to make money. It's not to become famous. I'm there for 100% to support the person. And I think no matter what I say, that somehow that underlying context comes across. I don't think they feel I'm just being cavalier or dismissive, even though it may sound that way. And even though I say cavalier and dismissive things and as a challenge. And I'm reminded of a case where a guy came to see me, and this was quite unusual in a number of respects, and we met for 2 or 3 sessions, and I thought, this is just going terribly. This just is not working. And I felt I had to do something about this. So at the next session, I said, listen, I have 2 things to tell you. One is I don't like you. And the second is, I don't believe a word you've said. And he said, well, I don't like you either. And I think therapy is a load of crap. I said, well, now those are the first 2 things you said that I believed. So I said, given that attitude, why are you here? And he said, well, I had seen his wife a few years before, and she found it very valuable and said he should come for help. I said, well, just because it worked for your wife doesn't mean it's going to work for us or that we're the right team. And so we agreed to stop meeting. And I thought that was the end of it. And about 2, 3 months later, I got a call from him saying, could I come in and see you? And I said, sure. He came in. And everything was different. He was now talking about actual problems. We had some great sessions. I did like him at this point. And he said, the only reason I came back is because of what you said that day, because I realized I could always count on you to tell the truth. So that's a very high ethical model I have, which is that as a therapist, one of my services is to tell the truth. Does that answer your... Yeah.
Thank you. I have a personal curiosity, if I may say so.
Yeah.
You said that you are coming from a position of love towards the client. So I'm curious, how does it fit with "it doesn't matter"? And it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter.
Someone else can answer that? You know, in fact, the position of love is a position of connection and acceptance. And I accept the entire world as is, including that it has no intrinsic, that nature doesn't care. The dogwood tree in my yard finally died from dogwood fungus. The fungus was trying to raise its family. That overcame the dogwood tree. Nature didn't care who won. And only I care who won. So a truly loving position is an open position, not a judgmental position. So I think these are compatible. Other questions? We have about 4 minutes.
In the couples context, when you introduce the concept of not taking life personally, particularly in relation to the other person,
Yeah.
how do you manage the potential inference that one might take that gives me license to make hurtful decisions in response to my partner, because after all, you're not supposed to take it
Maybe you're
personally.
seeing different couples than I am, but they're already doing hurtful things.
Yeah.
I don't know they could do any more. And as soon as they come in and they do this, start their usual hurtful stuff, I say, well, you're engaged in a conversation of recrimination, accusation, and characterization. That shuts them up for a minute. That's a term of Maturana's, by the way. A conversation of recrimination, accusation, characterization. And in that conversation, which is a linguistic domain, all there is mutual hurt. There's no problem solving. So let's distinguish between when you're engaging in that conversation. If you want to engage in that, great. Take 20 minutes. Let's do recrimination, accusation, counterattack, etc. And then we could try a problem-solving conversation, if you like. Now, because I put it that way, and because they haven't heard those terms, I had one couple came back a number of months later and said they were having such a great time looking at each other and saying, I think you're in a conversation for accusation, characterization, recrimination. It takes all the sting out by labeling it that way. When you name the game, you change the game. So by allowing recrimination, saying, yep, that's one of the things we do, and it's not personal. Lots of couples do that. In fact, most of those that visit me do that. What's the big deal? I mean, that's your calling, you know. So that's the way I handle that. And I have never seen that it got worse because because I told them it's not personal. And by the way, it's not personal. They would do that with anyone else they were living with who left their dishes in the sink. You were an extra from central casting. One more? Anybody would bomb. The trouble is, Bob asks such good questions.
Well, you can end with the question rather than the answer in that case.
Right.
I was just wondering, Jay, I've had the opportunity to listen to you talk about these things, and I always enjoy it. And I'm wondering if there was a time in your life as a therapist or person when you encountered real reluctance on your part to get on board with the philosophy to which you now subscribe. Like, did you have to overcome some reluctance or resistance on your own part to take up the kind of therapeutic philosophy you now exemplify?
I think the short answer is yes.
Can you say what it was, the nature of that reactance or
Well,
reluctance?
the last occurrence of it was last week. I was having severe stomach cramps, a side effect of a colonoscopy I had had. And of course, all bets go out the window. This is personal, and it really matters, and none of this philosophy stuff. So what you do is you remind yourself that that's what's going to happen. Your mind is going to go right to the story, and it's going to reify it, and it's going to make it big, and make you important, and make the world revolve around you. And the antidote is you keep reminding yourself that's not the big picture. And you're never through with that. I mean, you maybe get better at it. I think I do it faster now. So instead of an hour of self-pity, only 10 minutes. But you always are going through that process. Thank you all. You've been a great group.
I just want to take a minute to thank Jay for his never disappointing talks, always controversial and always mind unsettling. Jay, thank you so much for
You're
coming
welcome.
such a long distance to do this for us. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, that was very helpful. Sure.